Well, good evening, my good friends, and how are you all doing tonight? This is Carpo with an After Dark series. I always enjoyed doing these videos because, being After Dark, I can kind of just sit back and relax and make a video and not have to worry about staring at the camera. But to be brutally honest, it's actually easier for me to look at the camera for some reason. However, I can't really sit down and relax because of my sciatica, so I'm kind of standing here and wobbling back and forth. And to be honest, I don't even really feel like making a video. I was going to go sit down and relax and watch a movie because it's 11:35 p.m. However, I obligated myself to make this video tonight to discuss a subject that one of my subscribers mentioned, and they were asking about the missing persons cases that happen at national parks. And I thought I would discuss this only for the sake of the fact that I've always been kind of fascinated with this too. And many of these stories, of course, they go back, a century almost to when the national parks really became popular. I mean, there was a time when there was no such thing as camping in America. I mean, most people were glad to just get away from nature and get into their beautiful suburban homes and their white picket fences. Why would they want to go out in the woods and get dirty, right? But there was a point when we decided we wanted not only national parks, but we wanted backcountry camping. We wanted to be able to travel to remote places and get dirty for a little while. And I was raised as one of those people. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest here and in Oregon, and I was always I would go camping with my father in the summer. He liked to go out to the woods, and he liked to go to southeastern Oregon into the desert, and he would take me to these places that were so remote on the border of like Oregon, Washington, or Oregon, California, and Nevada, like right in this little triangular area by this place called the Trout Creek Mountains. And we would, go camping for the sake of getting away from people, and that was the purpose. And one of the interesting things about getting away from people is there will always be stories of alien abductions or wild stories about, animals attacking people, which it's interesting how rarely these things really happen. And that's why I wanted to make this to kind of respond to. I've already spent the first few minutes kind of defining my, early thoughts on it here, but the main point I want to make is the disappearances in national parks really aren't any more interesting than the ones in the city. The only difference is the fact that they are in remote areas. And I'm going to go over a few of these things, and I have just a few statistics to mention. First of all, you might read a couple of websites which say, over the past 50 years there have been over 1,600 people, declared missing from national parks, which is true. And then you'll go on to read that many of them were found, most of them were found, but there are all these strange situations and cases involved where, it's very mysterious. They might appear in some remote place with in bare feet where their feet are completely undamaged. People missing their shoes and clothes. A lot of missing children where they claim they were just right behind the people. But let me just tell you, as a parent, I know kids wander. And it's, of course, you're going to tell people they were right behind you. What parent's going to say, well, we left Johnny, a mile behind us, and he was wandering up the trail, kind of wandering off, so we just said, catch up, and he disappeared. But here's the thing. If 1,600 people have gone missing over the past 50 years from national parks, here are the interesting statistics about the country in general. In the United States of America, it says that there are as many as 100,000 active missing persons cases in the U.S. at any given time. And there are an average of 600, well, in the year 2010 alone, there were 692,944 people reported missing. And 500,000, half a million people under the age of 18 went missing. Now, a lot of these are found as well. But let's compare 500,000 in a year to, let's say, the 1,500 in 40 years. And you start to realize that it's just the fact that it's the actual national park that makes it really interesting. Now, something I found, and I did a little research before I made this video, I live in the state of Washington, and we're among the top 5 states with the most missing persons per capita. So Washington has 643 current open missing persons cases. So there's 8.7 missing persons for every 100,000 residents. But does this scare me? Not necessarily. Unfortunately, east of here in Spokane and some of the eastern counties, there are a lot of Native Americans, and there is a huge issue with missing girls and women in these Native American reservations. That's for a completely separate subject, but I'm assuming that this is often the case. I get Amber Alerts on my phone, and they are almost always from out in eastern Washington. It's a really strange thing, but that's for another story altogether. One of the even though they say 1,600 people went missing from national parks, and even though the ratio varies, it doesn't mean that it's any less creepy, And the reason the person asked me about this is because I go camping and hiking, and the truth is I love the woods. I love remote areas, and my mom, she watches YouTube, like all the rest of us, and she's told me, she always has this kind of like, be careful out there in the woods. She believes in Sasquatch and in UFOs, aliens, a variety of things, but I do too. I just believe it at a different level. In other words, I don't just take, the fact that when I go out there I'm in danger. And it's because of the statistics. They actually support that it's, generally safer out there. But let's move on here for just a moment first. Well, there were a couple of things I did want to talk about, but there are many, many different stories, but I wanted to give an example of one story where a pair of shoes were found with just the shin bone, and all the rest of the body was missing. The jeans were empty. It was a person who had been missing for a long time. And the article I read claimed that his skull had been found in like 1 inch by 1 inch pieces. And so I researched this guy's name and the whole story further. And upon closer inspection, I found out that indeed, yes, his shoes had the foot bones in them still, and the rest had likely been carried off by animals and scavenged over the year or so he was missing. And his skull was not found in 1 inch by 1 inch fragments, but rather it said the cap of his skull, or the crown, was found a little ways away from the rest of him. And it was in a place where food was scarce, and naturally wolves, coyotes, whatever lives there, foxes, they will drag these pieces away. And that's just the way the world works. Just because a body is found dismembered doesn't mean that there was foul play. But let me say, I'm not discounting the fact that there may be more to this. But those are my feelings generally. I feel safe in national parks. I feel safe in the woods. I've never had an issue with going out into the woods, and I guess the one that happened was in Crater Lake National Park, with the skull that was supposedly in pieces. But anyhow, upon closer research, you can find that most of it's BS a lot of the time. But there's one final discussion I wanted to have, if I can find the name of it. It's called the Dyatlov Pass incident. And Dyatlov Pass was a place in Russia where these guys, 9 hikers, were found dead. Okay, let's put it that way. And these hikers, some of them, like 4 of the hikers, apparently, a couple of them had some slight bruising or a fracture of a rib or whatnot, but it wasn't anything that was too severe. But they were found frozen to death. And the person who asked me to make this video asked specifically about this incident, which is why I'm talking about it. And it was a very mysterious case, back in the 50s, the interesting thing is, honestly, all I have to really say is, hey, Russia in the 50s. I mean, Russia hid everything. They never. There were many different theories as to why these people all died. The interesting thing was, like, four of them, they died. They all died of hypothermia, but four of them had, their clothes missing, and they had ripped out of their tent, and it had been cut from the inside, and they had ran. And there are several theories as to why a person would run from their tent with one shoe on or no clothes on at all. And some of them were found frozen to death in the snow, and a few of them were found farther away by a fire pit, and they were severely bruised. It could, impacted or hit by some, and one of the people apparently had radiation on their clothing. So, of course, it's some interesting conspiracy thing, where anything could have happened. Apparently, Russia, over the years, have admitted they were actually doing flare drops or bomb tests. There are many different things that were going on at the time in the area, and that the people could have been harmed by their own military testing. But it's not sure. There's one theory that says it could be an avalanche. But the location and the situation says that it's not likely that there was an avalanche that killed these people. There was one interesting thing I researched that was called the Katabatic wind, Katabatic wind, and this is a very strange and extremely rare phenomenon where a very powerful force of wind comes gusting through these passes, and perhaps that could have been it as well. But infrasound was the one that was interesting. When wind passes through these areas, it can create a very deep, what you would call infrasound, which can actually, it's interesting, it can create panic attacks and paranoia in humans. So if there was an infrasound caused by a major windstorm, it could actually cause people to act irrationally and attack one another. And that was my first thought when it said that people had ripped out of their own tent. My thought was either A, they thought an avalanche or something dangerous was coming, or B, somebody in the tent was freaking out and trying to harm their tent mates. And I have no idea which one would be, the most likely. But the Soviets were testing these parachute mines, is what they're called. And they would drop them, of course, they are exactly what they sound like. They're mines that are dropped on parachutes. And some of the injuries apparently could have been caused by this, because 3 of the bodies weren't found until the next spring. They were buried in the snow. And to go back to the guy who died at Crater Lake, whose legs and his skull were found, he actually was out hiking by himself in Crater Lake in the middle of the winter in 7 feet of fresh powder snow without snowshoes or skis. And if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know, then you're an idiot to go out in the elements. Nature will fuck you up. It doesn't care, that you're just taking a nice jaunty hike in 7 feet of snow. But anyway, one of the final theories about this other incident in Russia was, it's called paradoxical undressing, which has been shown that hypothermia can induce behavior known as paradoxical undressing, in which hypothermic subjects remove their clothes in response to perceived feelings of burning warmth. They feel like the insides of them are burning. They have this feeling like they're actually hot when they're freezing. And that's kind of a scary concept, actually, but there's also Arctic hysteria, and which is the theory that cosmic rays or solar winds can cause people to get paranoid. And there are tons of other pseudoscientific theories. But let's just say this. It happened over 50 years ago, and it was in Russia. And the likelihood that it was anything more than somebody going crazy or some weird incident where people were hiking in the mountains and they probably shouldn't have been, I don't know. So this entire video, I've basically sounded like I'm dismissing anything scary, happening. Let me just say this. I've always enjoyed mysteries. I live in the Pacific Northwest, damn it. I mean, I'm like an hour from Mount St. Helens, and Mount St. Helens is considered one of the hotspots for UFO reports. And just like down south in the Redwoods, where I've traveled down there, and it's like Bigfoot country, and I met these people at Crater, or no, it was Shasta Lake. We stayed like 15 years ago, camping for like a week, and these people, Jim and Kathy, we met there with their dogs, Dozer and Little Guy, and the dude and I walked back up into the woods, and he was obsessed with Bigfoot, and he was showing me these tracks that he claimed were Bigfoot, and I don't know to this day whether they were or not, but the point being, it's a fascinating story. I don't know necessarily if I 100% believe in Sasquatch, and I don't know if I 100% believe in any mysterious disappearances, or at least I would say a majority of them are likely explainable, because the bodies are found later and the people say, well, we already searched there and there was no body. And of course you're going to say that. I mean, nobody's going to say, oh, well, I never looked there if it was like right by camp. But it's hard to find people in the woods. Let me tell you that. My point to this video is not to discount mysterious disappearances, and it's not to try to prove that I guess there aren't any mysteries, and it's definitely not to scare or support people. I guess it would be to support people going into the woods. That's my main point. I want to support people going to the outdoors and traveling to awesome places. I don't want nature to be destroyed, but, you know, we humans, that's what we're good at. There are a lot of people out there who don't get to travel, don't get to explore. People who have never been to the beach, or the desert, or the woods. People who are scared of mosquitoes or flies, and so they don't do anything fun. But let me tell you, when you're sitting out in the middle of nowhere by yourself, by a beautiful lake that you can only reach by hiking, and you know for a fact no road has ever made it to that lake, I'll tell you, the feeling is freeing. And it shouldn't be scary. I want people to realize that, this fear of the woods is completely unfounded and preposterous. So that's my opinion. Thanks for listening, and have a wonderful night, everybody. Don't be creeped out. There's enough creepy shit in the world. Peace out.